get up. And on the way up, we're going to bite a kneecap off, all right? And we're going to stand up, and then it's going to take 2 more shots to knock us down, all right? And on the way up, we're going to take your other kneecap, and we're going to get up, and then it's going to take 3 shots to get us down.
And top of the morning to you, Kneecaps Nation. We are back at it again for the post-St. Patty's Day edition of Kneecaps for Breakfast. Vince Progar, that's me. Happy to be joined, as always, by the man decked out in St. Patty's Day green, Phil Byrne. And Phil, here we are. We're already at St. Patty's Day, so that means we are inching closer and closer to NFL draft season already. How about that?
Oh, I thought you were going to say NCAA tournament.
Well, we're doing that
this
too,
week.
Right?
We got that. Da, 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 da. There we go.
There we go.
And yeah, looking forward to it. But yeah, Vince, you're also wearing the St. Patty's Day green as well.
Of course.
Thing I like about St. Patty's Day, again, free agency, new NFL year. About 6 weeks or so for the NFL draft. So, more and more time has eclipsed since the Philadelphia Eagles defeated the Chiefs in the Super Bowl. We are in the heart of the offseason right now. We're kind of out into the doldrums of summer where there's just really nothing except OTAs going on. So still have a lot to talk about, still have a lot to break down. And I think really from when we last spoke and did a podcast to where we are now, it seems like half the league is basically shifted within the span of a day or two, going back to like Monday and Tuesday.
Absolutely. Absolutely. So we do have a lot to accomplish on this episode, but what we're kind of going to do is we're going to go back in time a little bit, prime the pump, as it were, and do a little kneecap recap and touch on some of the games from the 2024 season to kind of get us in the mood for the current goings-on that have been taking shape here, because as you pointed out, Phil, things look a lot different around the NFL as a whole, and there's still plenty of more pieces left to still fall into place. So we'll kind of bring you up to speed as best we can here, but we'll turn the clock back real fast. So as you may remember from a couple of weeks ago, we kind of did things a little different last episode and skipped over it. So we'll get back on track on this episode. So where we left off was the second week of November. So we have the Lions fresh off a big divisional road win against the Green Bay Packers. And what do the NFL schedule makers do to follow that up? Well, of course, they send them on the road to Sunday Night Football to take on the Houston Texans, who had a good 2023 season, and things started out pretty good for Houston, and things were maybe showing some signs of leveling off a little bit, maybe a little bit of a sophomore slump for C.J. Stroud, maybe some injury, bad luck on the horizon. It looked like some hints were being dropped, but Houston was still looking pretty good at the time. They came into it with a 6-3 record. The Lions were 7-1 going in, so we knew it was going to be a hotly contested battle between two teams hungry for a win on national TV. Where should we start? Do we want to start with the good or the not so good? I think we got to start with the not so good, Phil. Jared Goff comes out.
I think that's the only place with this one.
Yeah, Jared Goff comes out, throws 5 interceptions in the game. The Lions quickly dig themselves a hole. They're down 10-0 at the end of the first quarter. They're down 23-7 at halftime, and it's almost a matter of, hey, what do you do? Do you start to game plan and strategize for the second half, or do you just take the first half and throw it in the garbage? Because whatever happened in the first half, Phil, wasn't going to get the job done over the course of 60 minutes.
No, not at all. And it was pretty surprising to see this out of Jared Goff. I think on the whole, we kind of saw some really, really good performances from him to this point in the season, going back to the playoffs. I think he kind of reached this level of expectations where, whether it be from a fantasy, a gambling, a Lions fan expectation, you knew probably 220 to 250 yards, 2 touchdowns, 0 interceptions, maybe a turnover here and there. Kind of the going rate for what we had seen from Jared Goff. This game completely got away from him. An absolutely terrible game, and one that I'm still very, very shocked that we, came on the other side with it, kind of going into the second half there with some of the turnaround. But Houston absolutely jumped on us early on. Jared Goff did not help things out.
Yeah, and we all knew that Goff was overdue rather, for a clunker, and he definitely put out a clunker in the Houston game. And it wasn't all Goff, it was the defense too, with 12 seconds left in the first half. It's like, hey, if you at least hold your water and keep this thing within single digits going into halftime, you feel a little bit better. But what does Houston do? They go right down the field and they add a key touchdown inside 15 seconds. So instead of it being 16-7 or at worst 19-7 for a long field goal, now it's 23-7. And now you're starting to get a little bit concerned about what goes on, especially because Houston is due to get the ball back to start the second half. So you kind of get the 2-for-1 type deal. Well, that's
Mm-hmm.
when you start seeing some guys start to step up, Phil. Carlton Davis probably has arguably his best or most memorable performance as a Detroit Lion, with 2 second-half interceptions to
Mm-hmm.
really start to flip the game a little bit. Houston, at that point, after committing those turnovers, they're not able to start moving the ball inside the 30-yard line. They're able to move it in between the 30s okay, but once they get it down inside the 30, they start running out of gas, and then the Lions start seeing, hey, we have a little bit of life here all of a sudden. And we start getting some really freaky outer space stuff here with a
Yeah.
big field goal by Jake Bates to tie the game from 58 yards out just by a hair, and to win the game after the Lions did just enough to get the stop and then get right down into field goal range. A 52-yard field goal made by Jake Bates to walk it off, again, made by that much. You could
Yeah.
probably put both of the distances that he made, both combined kicks together, and it's probably a blade of grass. That is the amount of space in between the goalpost and the
Yeah.
ball as it sailed through the uprights. Just like something we'd never seen before, Phil. Lions walk it off in crazy fashion. You never would have thought it after seeing Goff throw 5 interceptions.
No, and in Bates we trust. I think this was the game that he absolutely solidified himself as a bona fide NFL kicker, a guy that we can trust, a guy that we can have good faith that he's not going to go. You know, if he has 4 field goal attempts, he'll make 1 or 2 and miss, 2 or 3. This was the game where you knew he was reliable, he was consistent, and if we really needed to go ahead and win a game on a field goal, he can do it. This was very much about Jake Bates. He kept us in the game. He helped win us the game. And I think if I remember right, he did get a game ball after this one, as he so deserved.
Absolutely. And, he was a brick salesman in Houston, and he kind of had this coming out
Yeah.
party of sorts in Houston. So it's amazing how
Yeah.
life kind of goes full circle in a way. But one of the most improbable wins you ever will see. And if you were a Detroit Lions fan watching it on the Eastern time zone, this wasn't wrapping up for the night until about 11:30 at night on a Sunday evening. So, of course, you have the feeling of feeling all wired and everything like that, getting ready for bed to start another long work week. But hey, those feelings are well worth it after all we've had to endure as Lions fans.
Mm-hmm.
So, how do we follow that up? We have the Jacksonville Jaguars coming to town, and kind of similar to that Titans game we talked about last time around, we kind of circled it thinking this was going to be a gimme game, like a automatic W on the schedule. But of course, you got to play the game. So what does Jacksonville
Mm-hmm.
do? They get the ball first, and they drill a 59-yard field goal to go up 3-0 early. No Trevor Lawrence in this one, so you have Mac Jones as the backup quarterback. Jacksonville, all sorts of banged up all over the place. But again, you never know what you're going to get. We wouldn't have ever thought that a 5-interception performance by Goff a week ago would have translated to a win. So anything can happen. And once the Lions got the ball, that was all she wrote from there. One of the most dominating offensive performances of the entire season, maybe of the last 5 to 10 years for that matter. A 52-6 beatdown of Jacksonville. They had a plus 28 advantage on first downs, 38 of them, 38 first downs. 645 total yards of offense for the Lions. They only gave up 170 on defense, kept Jacksonville out of the end zone all day long. I think it was probably the perfect offensive performance
Yeah.
relative to what they were able to give up on defense. You're not going to see a lopsided effort like this too often in the pro game. You see it in college, like when Alabama plays Tennessee Tech or something like that. You don't see this in the NFL with the amount of parity and professionals and guys who have been around the block as many times as they have been, Phil. It's just something that was it was kind of fun to watch from a Lions standpoint, but for the
Yeah.
NFL purist, almost a little too much.
This kind of reminds me of that old Family Guy bit where I think it's the Mets, and it's like season opener for the Mets, and it's like one pitch, and it's a home run from the other team, and the season's over.
Yep, yep.
Like as soon as the Jacksonville Jaguars got that field goal, Lions offense get the ball, and that's what this game was like. This was the embodiment of, that little bit right there. This was one of those ones that I was shocked Doug Peterson was not fired immediately after or the day before. Very strangely, that I did he. I think he finished out the regular season. I think,
but you kind of knew at that point, especially because his forte was offense and being more of a leader of men kind of thing, and it looked like they had no even so much as a gasp of air on offense. And it just kind of seemed like an NFL roster that had basically just packed it in. And that is opposite of what you see from a guy who's had success in this league and has a Super Bowl victory to his name.
Yeah. And they don't have Trevor Lawrence, but I think most NFL teams and front offices probably like Travis Etienne and Brian Thomas Jr. And still, Jaguars really couldn't get much out of either of those guys. So all around great performance from the Lions. I think this is an easy one to kind of recap and just say, we kind of kicked their ass, and we're just going to kind of keep things moving on.
And almost kind of like a game where it's like if you're bored in the middle of July and looking for something on TV and nothing's on TV, maybe fire up the highlights of the game against the Jaguars and maybe feel good about yourself for an evening, thinking, hey, that's our team that did that, So
exactly.
The proverbial shoe needed to still drop at some point. I mean, you come off a huge win on the road at the Packers. You come back from what should have been a loss and essentially grab the game from Houston, and you beat down the Jacksonville Jaguars in ways that really no team in the league in the Jacksonville Jaguars history ever has. So you think something's got to give here because you've got on the other side of it, you've got a Thanksgiving matchup against the Bears. So a game at the Indianapolis Colts kind of seemed like a game where that type of scenario would play out. Well, here's the problem. You have a second-year quarterback in Anthony Richardson who is a couple weeks removed from basically checking himself out of a game because he needed a breather, because there's no time to get breathers any of the other times of the week minus the 60 minutes of game action. That's a whole different story. You can look back at previous episodes for our more in-depth take on that situation. But you got Richardson, who was out for a couple of games after that situation. This was his first game back. So the question is, had he maybe learned a lesson or two or something like that along the way? Are the Lions due for a stinker? Well, none of that stuff happened. Richardson did not play very well. The Lions defense played awesome. The running game was clicking on all cylinders. 3 rushing touchdowns for the Lions. They raced out to a big lead against the Colts. They wound up winning 24-6 heading into the Thanksgiving Day game against the Bears. And that's what you need to do, Phil. You need to go on the road and take care of business, and that's what they did.
Yeah, I think some people thought that this could be a trap game, so to speak. A lot of pretty impactful games still left on the Lions calendar or season to go through. You had that massive win against Jacksonville. This would have been very, very easy to get lost in the sauce and, only score 14, 17 points, and just really struggle on a kind of hangover kind of Sunday. But that's not what happened here. I mean, it wasn't the prettiest game by any stretch, but the Colts looked pretty terrible in their own right. Lions did a great job with them. Anthony Richardson looked completely lost. So again, another solid win against the AFC South.
And gets the Lions to 10 wins on the season, 10-1 record going into Thanksgiving, and really gives the Lions something to feel good about going into a game where you got to throw the records out with the Chicago Bears coming to town. The Bears are starting to struggle. They were on a big-time losing streak, just as the Lions were on a big winning streak at this point, 9 in a row heading into the Thanksgiving Day game. And it was all Lions to get things going. The Lions, it's well documented, they haven't played well on Thanksgiving over the course of their recent history. And I believe they had lost 7 in a row coming into this
Yeah.
one on Thanksgiving. So
Yep.
you knew they needed to get off the schneid at some point, and this on paper was the perfect opportunity to do just that. The Lions jumped out to a 16-0 halftime lead, but of course, no lead is ever too safe in the NFL, and it seemed like there were some missed opportunities. There was more settling for field goals than I thought we were capable of in that first half. And it almost felt in the moment, Phil, like they left points on the table to where it's almost like they left the window open just enough for the Bears to jump back into it. And that's what they did. The Bears kind of in full, hey, let's just gun it all over the yard and see what happens mode. It seemed like, if you know it, Bear, Keenan Allen just caught another touchdown. I mean, that's not something that you want to get in the habit of doing, is leaving that window open for a team that really has nothing to lose. And that kind of played itself out there over the course of the Thanksgiving Day game.
In my opinion, this was one of the most frustrating games of the season. It's Thanksgiving. We know the team was fired up. The Bears really, at this point in the season, because I think this was after that game, the loss to the Commanders that really kind of put Eberflus under the microscope a little bit, and that member of the secondary, I can't remember his name, who kind of gave up the play there. But again, this is one that I think we should have easily probably been able to win between 14 or 10 points, somewhere in there. We did not do enough in the second half. I thought we were coasting a little bit. And, it ended up almost costing us, right?
Yeah.
Some bad mismanagement again by Eberflus and Caleb Williams. One of the most bizarre, last minute kind of clock mismanagement protocols that I've ever seen.
It cost Eberflus's job.
It did. It did. So this was one that I didn't feel great about. Probably one that I might want to rewatch in the off season, just to kind of see, as so many people are going to be behind the Bears and the Bears hype with Ben Johnson now. But yeah, we picked up the win, the 11th on the year. Not one that you feel overly great about, though.
Yeah, a win's a win in the NFL. Like we said, 10 in a row. Lions go to 11-1. The Bears continue their slide, and it's almost like if you look back on this game maybe a year or two from now, let's say the Bears do get it figured out with the personnel that we'll touch on with Ben Johnson and everything like that. You almost can kind of look back on this particular game, and if things are moving forward in the right direction for the Bears, this is almost the kind of the catalyst, the infinitesimal moment in time to where you can look back and say, hey, had things gone slightly different, had the clock management issue by Eberflus not taken place, sure, he might have lost his job, but maybe things would have looked a little bit differently in time. And like they say, step on a butterfly in the past and it alters the present or the future type of thing. You got to think something similar may have happened had things gone a little bit differently in that Thanksgiving Day game. It didn't, and the Lions held on, but like you said, Phil, not a game that you feel super great about heading into the stretch run. But a win's a win in the NFL. Lions are trucking along there at 11-1 heading into the stretch run. We will kind of recap the final month of the season coming up in the next episode of Kneecaps for Breakfast. All right, Phil. So the name of the game in this time of the year, free agency period, the start of the new league year and all that, is how are you going to build your roster up to be better? You know that the NFL draft gives you the opportunity to do just that, but the ability to sign free agents, get guys to come over to your side and to build up your own program is what you want to do. You want to look back on it and sell to your organization and to your fan base that you left it all out there and you made every possible effort to try and improve and get better.
Yeah.
And it seems to me, Phil, we don't necessarily need to go and, read every move in order, in chronological order or anything like that. Just we'll kind of start with a broad view of it and then kind of peel away the layers, I'm seeing a lot of bring the band back together, Phil. And I don't know if they really made the moves to get better, to really improve their franchise over this last week. What do you say about just a broad view about what the Lions have been up to this last week?
Well, we talked on Carlton Davis and the impact that he had in that Texans game. He is no longer a member of this Detroit Lions team. He signed
Patriots.
with Patriots,
And
yeah.
they
The team I was,
overpaid him, to be fair. They paid him
yeah.
3 at 60 million. So or 60 million
So
over 3 years. So that's a big overpay for a mid-level corner.
I think that forced Brad Holmes' hand a little bit into like, okay, well, we got to get some guy that's on his level. That brought in DJ Reed. I don't like his size, but I know he's impactful. I know he's quality, and I think he'll do a good job. I think the issue that a lot of us Lions fans are having, kind of digesting all of this, is the Bears signing a lot of guys. Vikings let Sam Darnold go, but it sounds like they're maybe involved in the Aaron Rodgers conversation or piece, and we'll see what happens with them. Packers, dead silent. I can't think of a move that they have made. There are some teams that their route through player acquisition literally does not really go through free agency unless it is a means that they lost a starter so impactful that they know their draft positioning, they can't go ahead and get a guy at that spot that would have any sort of impact with that. So I think we know where the Lions' flaws on this roster is. I think the issue is what other moves do we have at trying to keep this roster intact that is preventing us from signing guys or even make more additional moves. I think the other thing to keep in mind is I think there is a little bit of Brad and Dan. They completely overhauled this roster with the exception of Taylor Decker and Frank Ragnow and, maybe two or three other guys. I mean, basically everyone that they have brought in was under their tutelage in the first couple of years. I think there is a possibility that they are perhaps overvaluing some of the guys or thinking of where their contracts are going to be instead of looking outside of Allen Park and thinking like, oh, well, this guy's just as good. Okay, well, what is it going to take to go get that guy? Is this a guy that realistically we could bring in here and would have more of an impact, more of an upside, more of a ceiling than this person that we have on the roster? I don't know. That's just kind of my 2 cents. I do want the Lions to re-sign a good number of these guys that they have drafted. But I think at the same point, it should also just not limit you to just basically sign one, B plus to A grade level free agent, and then everyone else is just kind of on a 1 year deal.
Yeah, it almost seems like this is their view on this is so unbelievably far-sighted that it's actually really nearsighted with the blinders on because they're thinking about, oh, hey, we've got to sign so-and-so 3 years from now. We got to make sure we have the flexibility to do so. Never mind that the salary cap is going to go up between now and then inevitably, and you'll probably have enough to take care of one or two guys just with the fact that the salary cap is going to expand year over year. I want to take a look at the DJ Reed thing a little bit more. I mean, you have to keep in mind, Sauce Gardner drew all the big assignments.
Yeah.
You have the nickel guy for the Jets that got re-signed. The guy that they didn't want anymore was DJ Reed. You look at DJ Reed, who drew the most amount of pass interference penalties in the AFC a season ago. DJ Reed. Who drew the most number of pass interference penalties in the NFC a season ago? Terrion Arnold. So now you got the two guys who are the most prone in all of football to committing pass interference penalties from a year ago. Now you got them on the same side of the ball at the same position group. Yeah. So I'm just a little leery that did the Lions improve anything by letting Carlton Davis go to another team and you bring in a guy like DJ Reed from the Jets? I don't know if that helped you in any way. So you're almost thinking, hey, what are ways that we can do to not overpay for a guy instead of thinking, what can we do to bring in a guy that's going to make our defense better? And it just seems to me like they missed the mark on it. I'm not knocking DJ Reed as a decent
Well,
enough NFL corner because he's good enough. But again, we're
so
talking the
yeah.
difference in far-sighted, nearsighted. You're in a Super Bowl window. Let's not think down the line of implications around the rest of your franchise. The only implication you need to worry about is, am I setting myself up to win a Super Bowl next year? Yes or no?
So I guess on the DJ Reed piece, I would just say like, he has always played aggressive, and I think he's been good since he was on the Seattle Seahawks, a couple years back too. Um, you know, that Jets team was a mess, uh, even though they had some talented pieces on defense. So I'm not entirely sure what went into him being the highest flagged person in the AFC, but I'd be willing to bet he's going to probably cut that down a little bit here. But I think you're right. I think it seems like they are placing a premium over the guys that are in house and trying to negotiate what they have instead of going out and getting them. And I guess the thing is like you know I see a guy like Cooper Cup. He gets released from the Rams, and the Seattle Seahawks go get him. Khalil Mack, he gets a new deal. Joey Bosa gets a new, or was it Nick Bosa or Joey?
Joey.
Who's the old?
Joey.
Yeah, Joey. Yeah. He gets the new deal. Yes, there are going to be vets that they can get for minimum 1 year contracts the closer and closer you get to training camp, especially if a lot of these guys just don't even want to take part in training camp. But a lot of these teams have added players, and just because Detroit has had some playoff success or established a good, regular season, or it's a coach that a lot of these guys want to play for, does not mean that they're gonna like take the Lions deal over, some team like the Cowboys, or name your other
Yeah.
team that is going to be probably crap, but might offer them a potential as like a number two in a backup spot or something like that, instead of having to, prove it against some of the guys that the Lions have. So you just never know with this. I would venture like if I'm constructing a team, I would rather go the Lions route than kind of like some of the ways that these teams, like the Patriots, they are so devoid of talent. It makes sense why they did what they did.
Sure.
You don't want to do that every single
Get
year.
a functioning body to line up as
Exactly.
probably our lead corner for a year where we're going to be still
Yeah.
going through the doldrums under a new head coach and still trying to flip this thing from what it was. I get that.
Yeah.
Now, okay, so all right, let's set the DJ Reed thing aside. You got to think that they've used this opportunity to bring in other guys and names that are really going to have an impact on this roster. Well, maybe not. We talked a week ago. They re-signed Derek Barnes and Marcus Davenport. Okay, fine, whatever. They bring back Anthony Pittman, a special teams depth piece. They bring back Dan Skipper, a offensive line depth piece that struggled in
they love
big,
Skipper. Come on.
Yeah, okay, fine. They bring back Ezekiel Turner. Again, more of a depth piece, linebacker, special teams kind of guy. They bring back Miles Adams, far down the depth chart on your front four. You bring back Trevor Nowaski. Again, same thing, a depth linebacker. You bring back some dude named Kenny Yeboah off the Jets. Again, going to serve more as a depth special teams kind of guy. I like how on the other hand, though, I like how they brought back Craig Reynolds, a guy who, whenever they call his name, he comes up big. I liked what Tim Patrick brought to the team a year ago. I don't hate the fact that they brought him back. I think they're a guy that Goff can be familiar with to throw the ball to is nice. But again, then they start bringing in these guys like this Grant Stewart guy. I don't even know where the heck I think Indianapolis, same thing. A depth special teams kind of guy. Roy Lopez, defensive tackle, $4 million. Again, it seems more like a depth kind of guy, not an impact kind of guy. Are you sensing a pattern here, Phil, that it seems like
So
Anzarike, that's another one. I think his
here's
best days of
here's
football are behind him. It's like we're thinking more depth than we are actual guys that are going to go out there and make a tangible difference.
I don't think it will happen, but here's if I was in Brad Holmes's position, right? The Bengals just reworked deals with their receivers, with Higgins and Jamar Chase, and they're going to have them with Joe Burrow. So you think that trio should be together for the long term?
You'd think.
Where does Trey Hendrickson fit in the mold? What is his contract like? Can they afford to have Trey Hendrickson with all three of those pieces? Brad, I hope this conversation has taken place because I think he is exactly what Lions fans have wanted. It is a guy that you can go ahead and play opposite, of Aiden Hutchinson. What that compensation takes, I don't know. But I will say this, I don't think that conversation needs to start with a first round pick. All right. So maybe we get to that point where maybe it potentially to make it happen would count for it. But we got the compensation pick with Aaron Glenn taking the Jets job in the third round there. Don't think that we don't have any pieces to move and go get this happen because I've seen far less talented guys, go for compensation that you're like, really? Like, but I think Cincinnati, from a financial standpoint, they're gonna have to do a couple moves here, I think, to make everything make sense. And I just think it maybe made Trey Hendrickson a little bit more expendable on their point. So that would be what I would try to suggest, and maybe it could happen. I don't know if it will. I'd love to hear if the beat writers are, kind of getting in and hearing what sources are saying around the league, but that is something to keep an eye on potentially.
Well, the issue for Cincinnati is they pretty much took all their leverage and tossed it out the window because that you're paying lots and lots and lots of money to Joe Burrow, and you're going to pay almost the same amount to T. Higgins and Jamar Chase. So it's just basic economics. You don't have enough to go around to re-sign Trey Hendrickson. There is not enough money that you can do to keep yourself within the salary cap. Again, it's basic economics. So they can drive the asking price up all they want, but all the other 31 NFL teams know you can't afford your guy that you're asking a king's ransom for. So maybe the asking price comes down a little bit after the demand looks to maybe dry up a little bit, but it just seems to me, Phil, based on the quantity and quality of the signings by the Lions over the past week, and that's to say nothing about the fact that they brought in yet another backup quarterback that we hope to never see actually take a snap in Kyle Allen, as if having Jake Fromm and Hendon Hooker and Teddy Bridgewater and I think isn't David Blau still around somewhere within the practice squad.
I think David Blau is a assistant or something with the Commanders. I thought.
Good on him. Let him work his magic over there. But it just seemed like it's way too much bringing the band back together and signing guys who were on the team before, signing these special teams depth pieces, and it's almost like there has to be a major move coming up prior to the draft. Otherwise, this offseason is going to go down as one of the bigger disappointments that we can remember, because you have to keep in mind, too, you're not bringing everything back and you're going to run back a 15-2 roster. You still lost both of your coordinators on each side of the ball. So I don't think that in the course of a Super Bowl window you can afford to have a so-called minus offseason. So I think there has to be something on the horizon still. Maybe that's just me using it as a coping mechanism, but it just doesn't make any logical sense otherwise.
I mean, let's just be real, Vince. This is our therapy, right?
Yeah.
As Lions fans.
Yeah, there you go.
There you go. But to me, that would be the logical thing that I would do, if I was in Brad's spot, and just checking on the availability and saying, hey, can we start at the third round pick? Is that something that would interest you? Okay, you want us to throw in next year's sixth round pick or something like that too. Okay, well, and then have that conversation kind of go. Because again, I think from a dollars and cents standpoint, I just don't know how Cincinnati is going to balance everything.
What do you think about the two offensive signings real quick, bringing back Craig Reynolds and Tim Patrick. I kind of like the picks relative to some of the guys they brought aboard or brought back on defense. What do you think about bringing those two guys back into the fold for another go-round?
Well, what I like it, I'll start with the Tim Patrick one. The one that I like about that was what he had that one game with what, 3 touchdowns or
Yeah.
something like that. Yeah.
Yeah. Went off.
I think he was starting to really find his rhythm late in the season. And what I like about that is that means that is a draft pick that we do not have to go ahead and use in the middle part of the round or worry about Brad, in the second round going to get a wide receiver or anything like that. Now, it's not to say we won't do it, but in theory, you would think you have your top 3 positions at receiver filled. So you don't think that's going to be one. The other thing, too, is with Craig Reynolds, I think just his usage count is really good. I think not having Jalen Reeves-Maybin back, I think they're going to look for guys like him that can make an impact on special teams as well. You get that. I don't think Sion Baki is ready to kind of just naturally assume the number 3 running back spot either quite yet.
No. Again, special teams depth piece. You seeing a
Yeah.
pattern here?
Yeah. Yeah. So, I mean, neither move broke the bank. I think they're good chemistry guys with the people that are already in spots. So, those are, I will agree with you. They're both positive.
Also worth noting, Phil, that Kevin Zeitler and the Lions parted ways, so it looks like Christian Mahogany will be the right guard of the future. And I don't know if you decided to keep Glasgow in the mix just for continuity's sake, but Zeitler gone, Mahogany probably still a part of the equation moving forward. You're listening to this episode of Kneecaps for Breakfast. Vince Progard chopping it up with Phil Byrne. Glad you could be with us on our post-St. Patrick's Day edition of Kneecaps for Breakfast. And just in time for vacation, Phil, you and I are both headed off to Florida this week to get a little fun in the sun before the grind of spring and summer starts to set in for the two of us.
Absolutely, yeah. Going to different parts. I'll be in Tampa, and Vince, I think you're headed a little bit closer to Central Florida.
Yep, and on the Atlantic side, down at Port St. Lucie, and quick pit stop in Orlando while we're at it there. So much deserved for the both of us, and that is going to impact our next episode of Kneecaps for Breakfast. Just with Phil and I on our vacations, of course, we don't take weeks off on Kneecaps for Breakfast. But if you are subscribed, which we hope you are and appreciate if you are, you won't have to worry about it. You'll just have to wait for the subscribed podcast to drop into your inbox, and you'll just enjoy it once Phil and I get around to cutting it once we get back from vacation. So, Phil, we talked about what the Lions have been up to over the course of this past week, but I think what we need to do is kind of shift our focus a little bit to some of the teams that most directly concern us based on proximity and divisional play and what have you. And I think no better place to start than with the Chicago Bears. And what's one thing that the Lions have kind of built their franchise around is the line of scrimmage and kind of starting from there and working their way back. And I think what the Bears have been able to do in just a short amount of time is nothing short of remarkable, Phil. You go out and get Drew Dahlman, the center from the Falcons, which is kind of my suspicion. They went and took care of that. They picked up Jonah Jackson and Joe Thuney as well. So now you got that interior of your offensive line solidified to really gain in both pass protection for Caleb Williams and opening up some bigger opportunities in a run game that looked a little stagnant there down the stretch a year ago.
Yeah, I think really what Ben Johnson wants to do is twofold with those moves. Is obviously protect Caleb Williams, but then also make it for the Bears to not just have to win games on the shoulder of Caleb Williams, be able to run the ball. I really don't think their run game was very good at all last year. They became one-dimensional, and I think it put a rookie quarterback in a box that they just had a very, very difficult time getting out of. So I think those moves are going to bolster that line. I think it's going to help them. And, it's something that we as Lions fans, we're going to have to keep adding to that defensive line when you have good offensive lines like that now in division.
And we know that Jonah Jackson and Ben Johnson go way back from their time with the Lions. And even though they let him go a year ago and he had a cup of coffee with the Rams a year ago and now he's on the Bears, there were some clear splits between what the Lions were able to do from a success standpoint when he was in the lineup versus those 5 or 6 games that he had to miss due to injury. So I think just what he's able to provide for you as far as opening things up in the run game, I think you could say almost a 40 to 50 yard improvement in games where
Yeah.
Jonah Jackson played when he was with the Lions versus when he didn't. And the experience that he brings from being on playoff rosters for a few different years is only going to help the Bears' cause up front. And you got to keep in mind what they were able to do on defense as well on that line. You got a guy all of a sudden in Deo Odengbo. I'm hoping Deo. I'm hoping I'm pronouncing that guy's name right. He will line up across from Montez Sweat, which is something that they were missing a year ago. And they also bring in Grady Jarrett in the interior of the defensive line. So clearly, Phil, they got better on both lines. And as Lions fans, we're not hoping that they continue to make this type of aggressive move to improve this roster this quickly.
Yeah, I mean, it's a couple things like, on paper it looks good. Championships aren't won on paper. Injuries still happen. We know all about that from last season. I think the Jonah Jackson piece of it, he's good when he's healthy. Is he going to be healthy? Grady Jarrett, he is getting older, right? So there are some, potential issues with some of the moves they have there. It's not our money. It's not our team. So that's the way they wanted to allocate that money. They had the money and that cap space to be able to make that happen. And, good on them for being proactive, and trying to get some things done.
Yeah, and it seems like what the Bears are doing is magnified in a big way because of the Ben Johnson connection. And it almost makes it seem like what some of the other teams are doing isn't quite as big or impactful. And you can look at what the Vikings have been up to, Phil, and you can almost say they've been even busier than the Bears have. They've taken steps to upgrade the interior of their offensive line as well by essentially raiding the Indianapolis Colts. They bring in Will Freeze, the guard, and Ryan Kelly, the longtime center. So now they go from Indianapolis to Minnesota. They make upgrades of the interior of their defensive line by bringing aboard Jonathan Allen and Javon Hargrave. They re-sign cornerback Byron Murphy. And let's not forget, just in the last day or two, Phil, they went out and traded for Jordan Mason, the guy who backed up Christian McCaffrey for the 49ers a year ago to kind of bolster their running back room along with Aaron Jones. So don't look now, Phil, but the Vikings, even though it seems to some that they may have overachieved a little bit last year, are definitely taking the steps. Obviously, they have question marks at the quarterback position, but they've taken steps to make sure that just about every other position is about as locked down as you can get.
Yeah. I mean, I think they're doing some things to kind of grow that team a little bit. I think they had some depth issues that maybe came to the forefront a little bit later on in the season, even though they continued to rack up these wins. But some of these games were a little closer than they probably wanted, down the stretch. But we'll have to see, how they can parlay that into the new season.
It's no doubt that the NFC North a year ago was the best division in football. And I think we're seeing, based on the moves that are being made, that the NFC North reign of dominance is going to continue. But we're not seeing quite the same level of investment from the Green Bay Packers that we've seen from the other two teams. And that's not to say that they're looking to take a step back or anything like that. Quite the contrary. But almost kind of like what the Lions have done, Phil, they are very proud of the fact that all but 3 or 4 of their guys from a year ago are homegrown, drafted and developed Green Bay Packers, a roster full of their guys. But it almost kind of gets you thinking, Phil, because we've seen what happens with the Packers. They've been consistent winners for years. They are consistently contending for the NFC North title. They're almost always in the playoffs. They're almost always a lock to win a game or two. But at the same time, they have not been a serious threat to win a Super Bowl in 15 years. And you can draw some parallels with some other teams like Pittsburgh, for instance. Good for a long time, have not won a Super Bowl in a long time. Indianapolis has been decent for a long time. They may have had some lower lows, but same thing. They've been good for a while and have, relatively speaking, done very little, won very little. And it just kind of gets you a little thinking about what the Lions are doing and how they're building this. Are they almost in a position to maybe fall into a similar trap as some of these other franchises who have been consistently good for a long time, but are not good enough to establish themselves as a Super Bowl contender?
I mean, it's pretty easy to fall into that trap too, or think that your roster is good enough to win you a division when in reality you're only good for about 9 wins. Most divisions, that's not going to win you your division.
Especially one as uber competitive as the NFC North is.
Exactly. So that's the trap that you fall into. I think it's also, you don't want to fall into a trap of overvaluing the guys that you have on roster. I think some general managers make this mistake. They bring them in as rookies. They like what they contribute, and they're content with having them, on a second and third contract with the team. Instead of looking into, okay, well, hey, if we do have to spend, is it worth looking outside to see if we can get the investment there? So that's kind of where that argument comes into a little bit here. But that is what you need to look out for, because it seems to kind of be happening there in Green Bay, as we talk about it.
And what you have to keep in mind of is the way the Lions were able to build their roster as far as their core guys. I mean, obviously, you find a guy like Amon-Ra in the fourth round, and Brad Holmes is as good of a drafter as there is in football, but a lot of their big, impactful guys still came in the first round or two of the draft, and a lot of those is because the Lions had so many times from just not being any good to where they were picking in the top third of the draft, or they were able to use the bevy of picks they got from the Stafford trade to parlay those into trading up to that upper third of the draft to get guys like Jahmyr Gibbs or Jameson Williams or
Yeah.
what have you. Now that your war chest, if you will, is depleted, now you're picking at the bottom 3-4 picks of the first round. Your avenue to really go out there and get guys that you know are going to be game changers, it's almost like you're relying on hope at this point. So it seems like if they're not careful, you're going to be in a situation like the Steelers or like the Packers, to where you're setting yourself up to be good and contending for a division title year after year, but you don't have a clear-cut pathway to get better quickly if you're not going to be making these external moves like trades or free agency or what have you. So something to keep an eye on as we move forward here, and I hope that's something that the Lions don't consciously or subconsciously fall into. Before we wrap it up, Phil, I want to gauge your thoughts real quick on some moves around the NFL that have caught your attention outside of the four walls of the NFC North. Just anywhere around football that has kind of raised your eyebrows a little bit or paid some extra attention to.
So one was directly through free agency. That's the New England Patriots. I thought that bringing in a new coach, they were probably going to be somewhat aggressive in terms of like their player acquisition and stuff like that, but they really did quite spend a little bit with the New England Patriots there. Again, talking about getting Carlton Davis, some of these other guys, they got plenty of linemen in there as well. Really kind of helped bolster that a little bit. The one team that was not through free agency, but instead a trade. How about the Pittsburgh Steelers, right? So they let Justin Fields go in free agency. He goes to the New York Jets. They go ahead and they trade and make that deal done to go get DK Metcalf. How that's going to work with George Pickens and those two. They both wore 14. Apparently that got resolved. One's going to be number 4. seems like a lot of egos, a lot of big time plays and players at that wide receiver position, and have no clue how that quarterback position is going to sort itself out.
Exactly. It could be Aaron Rodgers. It could be Russell Wilson. It could be something else. Again, we talked about it. They aren't drafting high enough in the draft to go
Yeah.
out there and draft a big name guy unless they're able to pull something out of a hat that we're not aware of. It just doesn't seem like they have a clear-cut solution. So it's going to be interesting. As for me, I'm just paying attention to some of the other NFC teams. The Eagles, no sign of a hangover on defense. They go out there and get Azeez Ojulari from the Giants. They go out there and bring in Josh Uche from the Patriots. And these aren't big-name edge defensive end kind of guys, but you bring them into a Vic Fangio defense who's made a career out of taking mid guys and getting the absolute best out of them. So I think it's safe to say that Eagles defense is going nowhere after that Super Bowl victory from this past season. And then you got to look over at the Rams. They let Cooper Kupp walk. They couldn't find a trade suitor for him. I think the asking price may have been a tad high, but couldn't find a buyer. So they let him walk. And what do? They go out there and bring in Devontae Adams. So now you've got a duo of Devontae Adams and Puka Nacua for Stafford to be throwing the ball to, and their offense doesn't seem to be going anywhere. So the NFC as a whole, Phil, just seems like it's just one big giant arms race. But I guess that's the NFL as a whole, isn't it?
It really is, and we have all these moves. We don't know what the schedule is going to look like. There are still moves to be made. There's probably a couple big trades that, still have to happen, especially since we haven't been around the draft yet. So it seems like there's still a couple dominoes to fall, but certainly the NFC, the NFL, very, very busy the first couple of days of the new NFL season.
And hey, we wouldn't have it any other way because aside from college basketball that's going to be starting up here, it gives us an excuse to, let's face it, give a damn about the NFL smack dab in the middle of March.
Without a doubt. Yeah, it's the sport that never sleeps. Right?
Nope, absolutely not. Phil, take some time to enjoy yourself on your vacation. Much needed, much deserved, I'm sure. But take some time to enjoy some fun in the sun, and we'll talk to you on the other side.
Sounds good. You too, Vince. And enjoy Florida, and we'll see you on the other side.
Amen. So that's going to do it for this episode of Kneecaps for Breakfast. Thanks for breaking everything down, Lions and otherwise, down with us. We hope that you are subscribed to Kneecaps for Breakfast, and we hope that you do so because our next episode is going to be a little bit later in the week than usual. So bear with us, and if you're subscribed, that will drop right into your inbox. So stay tuned for more Kneecaps for Breakfast. For Phil Byrne across the way, Vince Progar saying good morning, go Lions, forward on the field, over and out.